In a quiet suburban neighborhood where manicured lawns and matching mailboxes were the norm, Sarah Thompson lived a simple yet fulfilling life. She was a single mother of two lively kids, Emma, who loved drawing rainbows on every piece of paper she could find, and Jake, whose obsession with dinosaurs made bedtime stories an adventure. Their small home wasn't fancy, but it was filled with love, laughter, and enough sunlight streaming through the windows to make even rainy days feel warm. Sarah had always been someone who cared deeply about others. Her late brother, Daniel, had served in the military and returned home with injuries that changed his life forever. Watching him struggle to find affordable housing after leaving the hospital left a lasting mark on her. When he passed away unexpectedly last year, Sarah vowed to honor his memory by doing something meaningful. So when she decided to renovate her garage into an accessible living space, it wasn't just another home improvement project. It was a mission straight from her heart. She hired Mark Reynolds, a trusted contractor known for his craftsmanship and kindness. Mark wasn't your typical builder. He had a calm demeanor and always seemed genuinely interested in understanding what his clients wanted. What Sarah didn't know at first was that Mark himself was a retired Army medic. After serving overseas, he'd come back determined to give back to those who had sacrificed so much. He now ran a nonprofit organization that helped disabled veterans transition into civilian life by providing them with safe, affordable housing. It was no coincidence that Sarah chose him for this job. He shared her vision without even realizing it. The renovation began quietly. At first glance, it looked like any other construction project. Hammers tapping, drills buzzing, and the occasional shout between workers coordinating tasks. But there was something different about this one. Every nail hammered into place carried a deeper purpose. The walls weren't just being built to divide spaces. They were being constructed to create a sanctuary. Wide doorways were designed for wheelchairs, grab bars installed near showers, and ramps carefully planned for easy access. Every detail mattered because every detail was meant to serve someone who deserved nothing less than the best. But while Sarah and Mark worked tirelessly to bring this dream to life, not everyone in the neighborhood saw things the same way. In fact, tensions were already brewing beneath the surface. Karen Miller, a woman notorious for her strict adherence to the Homeowners Association (HOA) rules, had started noticing the activity outside Sarah's house. To Karen, anything out of the ordinary was a potential violation, and construction noise, that was practically a crime against suburban tranquility. Armed with her clipboard and a steely determination, Karen decided it was time to take matters into her own hands. Little did she know, her actions would set off a chain of events that would change more than just Sarah's garage. It would transform the entire neighborhood. Karen Miller prided herself on being the unofficial guardian of the neighborhood standards. Her mornings usually started with a cup of black coffee and a quick scan of the street from her front porch. She kept a mental checklist of everything that needed fixing. Overgrown hedges, cars parked in driveways overnight, or even wind chimes she deemed too loud. To Karen, these things weren't just minor annoyances. They were threats to the harmony and perfection of the community she loved so much. On this particular morning, as she sipped her coffee, her eyes landed on Sarah's house. The sound of power tools echoed through the air, breaking the usual stillness of the neighborhood. Karen frowned. Construction noise was bad enough, but what really bothered her was the pile of lumber and equipment spilling onto the driveway. It looked messy, chaotic, and completely unacceptable by HOA standards. Determined to put an end to it, Karen grabbed her clipboard, smoothed out her floral print blouse, and marched across the street. When she arrived at Sarah's property, Karen didn't bother knocking on the front door. Instead, she strode directly toward Mark, who was busy measuring a piece of wood near the garage. "Excuse me," she called out sharply, her voice cutting through the hum of activity like a knife. Mark turned around, surprised by the intrusion. He wiped his hands on a rag before stepping forward politely. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone calm but firm. Karen wasted no time getting to the point. "What exactly is going on here?" she demanded, gesturing dramatically at the scene around them. Do you have proper permits for all this? And what about noise restrictions? This racket has been going on since early this morning. Her words came fast and furious, each sentence punctuated by a jab of her pen against her clipboard. Mark took a deep breath, doing his best to remain composed. "Ma'am," he began, "everything is fully permitted, and we're following all the guidelines set by the city and the HOA. If you'd like, I can show you the paperwork." But Karen wasn't interested in listening. She cut him off mid-sentence, launching into another tirade about how disruptive the construction was and how it was affecting property values. Her volume only grew louder, drawing curious stares from passing neighbors. Despite her aggression, Mark refused to engage in an argument. He simply nodded and assured her that everything was above board. Still, Karen wasn't satisfied. She continued to rant, pointing out every perceived flaw, from the placement of the dumpster to the color of the tarps covering materials. By now, a small crowd had gathered, whispering among themselves about the commotion. Some watched with amusement, while others shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to intervene. As Karen ranted, Sarah emerged from inside the house, alerted by the raised voices. Seeing the situation unfold, she hurried over, her expression a mix of confusion and concern. "Is everything okay?" she asked cautiously, looking between Mark and Karen. For a moment, Karen paused, taken aback by Sarah's presence, but her hesitation lasted only briefly before she resumed her lecture, turning her attention to Sarah instead. Sarah listened patiently, nodding occasionally as Karen listed her grievances. While she understood Karen's concerns about neighborhood rules, she couldn't help but feel frustrated by the lack of empathy. Couldn't Karen see that this project was important? That it wasn't just about building walls, it was about creating something meaningful. As Sarah opened her mouth to respond, she noticed Mark giving her a subtle nod, silently urging her to stay calm. For now, they would let Karen have her say, but little did anyone know the real story behind the construction was about to come to light. And it would change everything. The next morning, Karen woke up with a strange sense of unease. She couldn't shake the image of Sarah's calm demeanor and Mark's quiet professionalism from her mind. Still, she convinced herself that she was in the right. After all, rules were rules, and someone had to enforce them. Determined to prove her point, Karen decided to pay another visit to Sarah's house, this time armed with more questions and an even firmer resolve. When she arrived, Karen found Sarah outside, chatting with Mark while they reviewed blueprints spread across a folding table. The two seemed deep in conversation, their expressions serious but warm. Karen cleared her throat loudly to announce her presence. Both Sarah and Mark looked up, surprised to see her again so soon. "I'm sorry to bother you," Karen began, though her tone suggested anything but apology. "But I need some clarification about what's really going on here." Sarah exchanged a glance with Mark before responding. "Of course, Karen. What do you want to know?" she asked politely, choosing her words carefully. Karen crossed her arms and tilted her head slightly, as if preparing for battle. "Well, for starters, why are you turning your garage into whatever this is? It seems excessive, doesn't it?" For a moment, Sarah hesitated. She hadn't planned to share the full story with anyone outside her close circle just yet, but something about Karen's persistence, and maybe even the flicker of genuine curiosity beneath her stern exterior, made Sarah decide to open up. Taking a deep breath, she stepped closer. "Karen, this isn't just a renovation project," she said softly. "It's going to be a shelter for disabled veterans." The words hung in the air, heavy and unexpected. Karen blinked, caught off guard. For once, she didn't have a quick retort. Sensing her surprise, Sarah continued, "My brother was a veteran. He came back injured and struggled to find housing that could accommodate his needs. When he passed away last year, I promised myself I'd do something to help others like him." Her voice wavered slightly, but her determination never faltered. This space will provide temporary housing and support for veterans who need a safe place to stay while they get back on their feet. Mark chimed in, his voice steady and sincere. And I run a nonprofit organization that helps these veterans reintegrate into civilian life. We've been working on projects like this for years. Then, almost as an afterthought, he added, "By the way, I'm a retired Army medic. This cause means a lot to me too." Karen stood frozen, her clipboard hanging limply at her side. She hadn't expected any of this. In her mind, she painted a picture of a selfish homeowner ignoring HOA rules for personal gain. But now, faced with the truth, she felt a pang of guilt twist in her chest. Memories of her own father, a World War II veteran who rarely talked about his experiences, flooded back. Suddenly, the construction noise and piles of lumber didn't seem so trivial anymore. Desperate to regain her composure, Karen stammered, I didn't realize." Her voice trailed off as she looked around at the work being done. The wide doorways, the sturdy ramps, the thoughtfully designed layout. It all made sense now. This wasn't just a building. It was a lifeline for people who had sacrificed everything for their country. Feeling increasingly uncomfortable under Sarah and Mark's patient gazes, Karen muttered something about needing to check her emails and hurried away. As she walked back home, her mind raced. She had always prided herself on knowing everything that happened in the neighborhood. But this time, she had been completely blind. Worse, she had judged without understanding. For the first time in years, Karen Miller wasn't sure what to do next. But one thing was certain. She couldn't ignore what she had just learned. That evening, Karen sat alone in her living room, staring blankly at the untouched cup of tea on the coffee table. The house was quiet. Her husband was out of town for work, and her teenage son had barricaded himself in his room, headphones on as usual. Normally, Karen enjoyed these moments of solitude. But tonight, her mind wouldn't stop replaying the conversation with Sarah and Mark. Their words echoed in her head, each one chipping away at the walls she'd built around herself. She tried to distract herself by flipping through the latest HOA newsletter, but even that couldn't hold her attention. Frustrated, she tossed it aside and picked up her phone instead. Typing Mark Reynolds Nonprofit Veterans into the search bar, she hesitated for a moment before hitting enter. What she found left her speechless. Page after page of articles, testimonials, and photos filled her screen. There were stories from veterans who credited Mark's organization with saving their lives, literally and figuratively. One man described how he'd been homeless for months after leaving the hospital, struggling with PTSD and physical injuries, until Mark's team stepped in and gave him not just shelter, but hope. Another shared how the transitional housing program helped him rebuild his confidence and find steady employment. Karen scrolled through photo galleries of smiling faces standing in front of newly renovated homes, arms linked in camaraderie. Each image felt like a punch to the gut. Her fingers trembled as she clicked on a video interview featuring Mark himself. Dressed in a simple button-down shirt, he spoke passionately about his mission. "These men and women have given so much for us," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "The least we can do is give them a place to heal and start over." As the video ended, Karen realized tears were streaming down her face. She quickly wiped them away, embarrassed by her own reaction, but the lump in her throat refused to go away. For the first time in years, Karen allowed herself to think about her father. He rarely spoke about his time in the war, brushing off questions with vague answers or changing the subject entirely. But now, sitting there surrounded by evidence of Mark's work, Karen remembered the glimpses she'd caught as a child, the late-night pacing when nightmares woke him, the way he flinched at loud noises, the distant look in his eyes whenever military parades came on TV. She had always known he carried scars, but she never fully understood their weight until now. Guilt settled heavily in her chest. How could she have been so blind? So quick to judge without asking questions? Her rigid enforcement of HOA rules suddenly felt hollow, almost cruel in comparison to the real issues people faced. For years, she had prided herself on keeping the neighborhood pristine. But what good was perfection if it came at the cost of compassion? Determined to make amends, Karen got up and rummaged through her kitchen cabinets until she found an old recipe book. Baking had always been her way of showing care, though lately she hadn't done much of it. Tonight, she decided she would bake something special, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. As she mixed flour, sugar, and butter, her thoughts drifted back to Sarah's project. Maybe, just maybe, she could be part of something bigger than herself, something that mattered. By the time the cookies were cooling on the counter, Karen had made up her mind. Tomorrow, she would visit Sarah again. But this time, not with accusations or demands. This time, she would come with humility and an open heart. Because deep down, she knew that true community wasn't about rules. It was about connection. And for the first time in a long while, Karen felt ready to embrace that truth. The next morning, Karen woke up earlier than usual. She carefully arranged the freshly baked cookies on a floral patterned plate, double-checking that they looked presentable. Her hands trembled slightly as she wrapped the plate in plastic wrap, her mind racing with doubts. What if Sarah didn't forgive her? What if the neighbors judged her for changing her stance so suddenly? But then she remembered the stories she'd read about Mark's nonprofit and the veterans it had helped. Taking a deep breath, Karen reminded herself why she was doing this. It wasn't about her pride anymore. It was about making things right. As she crossed the street to Sarah's house, Karen felt a mix of nerves and determination. When she knocked on the door, Sarah answered, looking surprised but welcoming. "Karen," she said cautiously, glancing at the plate in Karen's hands. "What brings you here?" I wanted to apologize," Karen stammered, holding out the cookies like a peace offering. "For yesterday. For everything, really. I was wrong." It was one of the hardest things Karen had ever said, but she forced herself to meet Sarah's gaze. "I didn't understand what you were trying to do, and I jumped to conclusions. That wasn't fair." Sarah blinked, clearly taken aback by the sincerity in Karen's voice. After a moment, she smiled softly and stepped aside. "Come in," she said. "Let's talk." Inside, Karen was invited to sit at the kitchen table while Sarah poured them both cups of coffee. The atmosphere was tense at first, but Karen broke the ice by explaining how she'd spent the previous evening researching Mark's nonprofit. "I had no idea how much work you two are doing," she admitted, her voice tinged with regret. "It made me realize how narrow-minded I've been." Sarah nodded, her expression softening. "Thank you for saying that," she said. "It means a lot. This project isn't just about building walls. It's about creating hope for people who need it most." Inspired by the conversation, Karen hesitated before blurting out an idea that had been forming in her mind. "Do you think maybe we could involve the neighborhood somehow? Like organize something to support the shelter? I know everyone loves a good bake sale or charity event." She laughed nervously, unsure if her suggestion would be well received. To her relief, Sarah's eyes lit up. "That's actually a wonderful idea," she said enthusiastically. "We've been trying to figure out ways to raise awareness and funds, but I didn't want to impose on anyone. If you're willing to help lead the charge, I'm sure people would get behind it." Karen nodded eagerly, feeling a spark of excitement she hadn't felt in years. "I'll take care of it," she promised. "Leave it to me." True to her word, Karen threw herself into organizing the event. Flyers went up around the neighborhood announcing a weekend fundraiser called Building Hope, a community celebration. Local businesses donated food, supplies, and even gift cards for a raffle. Parents volunteered to run games for kids, while teenagers offered to man lemonade stands. Even the HOA board, after some gentle persuasion from Karen, agreed to relax certain rules to allow for tents and tables in the cul-de-sac. By the day of the event, the entire neighborhood buzzed with anticipation. Brightly colored banners fluttered in the breeze, and the air smelled of fresh popcorn and barbecue. Neighbors who rarely spoke to each other worked side by side, setting up booths and decorating the area. Karen moved among them, clipboard in hand, directing traffic and ensuring everything ran smoothly. For once, her meticulous nature was a blessing rather than a burden. When Mark arrived with a group of veterans involved in his nonprofit, they were greeted with applause. One of the men, a young soldier named James who used a wheelchair, gave a short speech about how the shelter would change lives, including his own. His words brought tears to many eyes, including Karen's. As she stood there, surrounded by her neighbors and watching the community come together, Karen realized something profound. This wasn't just about raising money. It was about healing divisions, fostering understanding, and proving that even the smallest actions could make a big difference. For the first time in a long while, Karen felt proud, not of enforcing rules, but of breaking them to build something far more meaningful. The day of the fundraiser arrived, and the neighborhood transformed into a vibrant hub of activity. The once quiet cul-de-sac buzzed with laughter, music, and the tantalizing aroma of grilled burgers and freshly popped kettle corn. Colorful balloons swayed gently in the breeze, tied to every mailbox and lamppost, while hand-painted signs reading "Welcome Veterans" and "Thank you for your service" lined the streets. It was a far cry from the sterile perfection Karen had once prized, and yet it felt more alive than ever before. Karen stood near the entrance, clipboard tucked under her arm, greeting neighbors and visitors with a warm smile she hadn't worn in years. Her usual stern demeanor was replaced by genuine enthusiasm, and people couldn't help but notice the change. "Wow, Karen, you're really pulling this off," one neighbor said, holding up a raffle ticket. Another chimed in, teasing, "Who knew you had such a soft side?" Karen laughed, a real hearty laugh, and waved them toward the bake sale table. For the first time, she felt like part of something bigger than herself. At the heart of the event was Mark's nonprofit booth, where volunteers shared stories about the shelter project and its mission. Photos of completed homes and smiling veterans adorned the display, drawing crowds eager to learn more. Children clustered around James, the young veteran who had spoken at the setup, asking him questions about his service dog, Buddy. With each wag of Buddy's tail, another barrier seemed to fall between the veterans and the community. People weren't just donating money. They were connecting on a human level. Sarah flitted between stations, checking on food stalls, organizing games, and thanking everyone who contributed. At one point, she caught sight of Karen directing a group of teenagers as they set up a dunk tank. Watching Karen laugh as someone missed the target, Sarah felt a swell of gratitude. She walked over and placed a hand on Karen's shoulder. "I can't believe how much you've done," Sarah said sincerely. "This wouldn't have happened without you." Karen turned, her cheeks flushed from the sun and excitement. "It's the least I could do," she replied, her voice tinged with emotion. "After everything I put you through, I needed to make it right. And, well, seeing everyone come together like this, it reminds me why we live here, why we care about each other." By mid-afternoon, the fundraiser was in full swing. A local band played upbeat tunes on a makeshift stage, while families enjoyed face painting and sack races. The bake sale table was nearly empty, thanks to Karen's famous cookies and other homemade treats. Even the HOA board members got involved, manning a lemonade stand and joking about loosening their strict rules, at least for the day. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the festivities, Mark took the microphone to thank everyone for their support. "When Sarah first approached me about this project, I knew it would be special," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "But I never imagined it would bring an entire community together like this. Thank you, all of you, for standing with us and showing these brave men and women that they're not alone." His words were met with thunderous applause, and Karen found herself clapping until her hands stung. As she looked around at the sea of smiling faces, she realized something profound. This wasn't just about raising funds for a shelter. It was about breaking down walls, literal and figurative. and building bridges instead. The neighborhood wasn't perfect, and neither was she. But maybe, just maybe, imperfection was what made life beautiful. That night, as the event wound down and neighbors lingered to clean up, Karen felt a deep sense of fulfillment she hadn't experienced in years. This wasn't the same community she had policed so fiercely. It was better, stronger, more united. And for the first time, she truly understood what it meant to belong, not because of rules or appearances, but because of love, compassion, and shared purpose. Months later, the shelter stood complete, a testament to hard work, resilience, and the power of community. On the day of its grand opening, the neighborhood gathered once again, this time in front of Sarah's newly renovated garage-turned-sanctuary. Bright ribbons adorned the entrance, and a large banner overhead read, "A Home for Heroes." The air buzzed with excitement as veterans, neighbors, local officials, and volunteers mingled together under the clear blue sky. Karen stood near the front, clutching a bouquet of flowers she had picked from her garden that morning. She adjusted her hat nervously, glancing around at the crowd. Gone were the days when she patrolled the streets with a clipboard, enforcing rules no one really cared about. Now she was part of something far greater, something that mattered deeply to everyone present. As Mark stepped up to the microphone to begin the ceremony, Karen couldn't help but feel a swell of pride. "Today is about more than just cutting a ribbon," Mark began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. He looked out at the crowd, his eyes lingering on Sarah, Karen, and the group of veterans standing beside him. This project started with one woman's vision: to honor her brother and give back to those who sacrificed so much for us. But it grew into something bigger because of all of you. He paused, letting his words sink in. "Because of your generosity, your time, and your belief in this cause, we now have a place where veterans can heal, rebuild, and find hope." Applause erupted, echoing through the street. Mark then turned to Sarah, thanking her for her courage and dedication. When he mentioned Karen's role in rallying the community, the crowd erupted into cheers. Karen blushed furiously, waving awkwardly as people patted her on the back and congratulated her. For someone who used to thrive on order and control, being celebrated felt strange, but also deeply rewarding. Finally, it was time for the ribbon cutting. Sarah invited Karen to join her and Mark at the front, holding oversized scissors together. "You've earned this moment," Sarah whispered to Karen as they positioned themselves in front of the ribbon. Cameras flashed as the trio cut the ribbon simultaneously, symbolizing the start of a new chapter, not just for the veterans moving in, but for the entire neighborhood. Afterward, guests toured the completed shelter. Every detail reflected care and thoughtfulness. Wide doorways designed for wheelchairs, grab bars in bathrooms, and cozy furniture donated by local businesses. Inspirational quotes painted on the walls reminded residents that they were valued and supported. One veteran, an older man named Robert, stood quietly in the living room, tears streaming down his face. "I never thought I'd have a place like this," he said softly to Sarah. "Thank you for everything." As the afternoon wore on, laughter and conversation filled the space. Neighbors brought dishes to share, turning the event into an impromptu potluck. Children ran around playing games, while adults exchanged stories over plates of food. It was chaotic, but in the best possible way. For the first time, the neighborhood felt less like a collection of houses and more like a true community. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Karen found herself sitting on Sarah's porch with a cup of tea. The two women sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars appear one by one. "You know," Karen said finally, breaking the quiet, "I always thought I was doing the right thing before. Enforcing the rules, keeping everything perfect." She shook her head, smiling ruefully. "But this is what really matters. Seeing people come together, helping each other. It's changed me." Sarah nodded, her gaze soft. "It's changed all of us," she replied. "And it's only the beginning." In the weeks that followed, the shelter became a cornerstone of the neighborhood. Veterans moved in, bringing their own unique stories and strengths. Neighbors continued to support them, dropping off groceries, offering rides, or simply stopping by to chat. What had once been a source of tension between Sarah and Karen blossomed into a partnership, and a reminder that even the smallest acts of kindness could ripple outward, touching lives in ways no one expected. As Karen walked home that night, she paused to look back at the glowing windows of the shelter. Her heart swelled with gratitude, not just for what they had built, but for the connections they had forged along the way. Rules might keep a neighborhood orderly, but love and compassion made it a home. And for the first time in years, Karen truly felt like she belonged.